Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to session 4 of ACETAI 2020 virtual conference. My name is Selina Yu. I'm a committee member of ACETAI and the managing director of Global Business College of Australia. I'm very honored to host this session today. Globalization has been under increased pressure for some time. As we know, this has many causes. The COVID pandemic has worsened and hastened those pressures. We all observe the rising geopolitical tensions involving the US, China, and Australia in recent time. Many of the issues and challenges have been discussed in the main forum session this morning. Such tensions have created significant trade and economic uncertainty. For the many companies and people engaging directly and indirectly in trading goods and services across the world, and the massive volume of cross-border financial flows and investment that occurs every day, a key question is the extent to which their work will be impacted and constrained by geopolitics. Robust trade and cross-border investment is the engine room of employment, innovation, economic growth, and wealth creation. Hence, it is critical that this is preserved. In addition, given the significant recent changes to international political and economic relations created by the present US administration, there is intense interest in whether President-elect Biden will initiate changes that will affect the current tensions. We are fortunate this afternoon to have 4 distinguished speakers. They are Professor Ankit Tam, Vice President of ACBC Victoria, Professor of Finance at RMIT University. Dr. Jian Yang, former Member of Parliament in New Zealand. Professor Andrew Chen, Professor of Practice in Marketing, Chinese University of Hong Kong, and Vice Chairman of the Board of the Greater Bay Area Business School. Mr. Dalo Gapi, President of ACBC Northern Territory. They combine a diverse wealth of experience across different countries and industry. They will share their perspectives and insights with us on some of the ways that geopolitics and geoeconomics are likely to interact in the immediate future. Before we start, let me explain how to use simultaneous translation. Locate the interpretation button in the icon bar at the bottom of your conference window. Click it to select a language. You will hear your selected language at 80% of volume and English commentary at 20% volume. If you would like to hear only the language you select, click the mute original audience option. We encourage everyone to be an active part of the session. So if you have any comments or questions, please type them in the Q&A area. We will discuss during the Q&A session. Before we start, all the speakers, could we take a photo together? So can I invite Dr. Jian Yang to turn on the camera?
And Selina, I will take the screenshot for you guys. And would you please kindly remove the other, I think I accidentally promoted 2 audiences to the panelists. So maybe you just remove them. You are sure. And then I can take a group photo for you all. Dr. Yang, would you please turn on your camera, please? Maybe he can't hear us. Dr. Yang, can you hear us? Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to find I'm trying to do the camera and I can't find. Can you hear me?
Host, please, would you please send an invitation, turn on the camera invitation to Dr. Yang?
Can you hear me? I'm trying to.
Yeah, we can hear you. We just can't see you. We can hear you.
Okay, but let me see. I don't know what to do here.
So you just
I'm trying to work on this.
You can invite the speaker to turn on the camera, so he will receive a message and he can just click the message to turn on the camera. It's on Dr. Yang's photo, so you can see. Oh, do
how about now, Dr. Yang?
Do you want to change the host back to me?
No, let me see if I can find someone to do it, but I don't know why I can't see myself.
Selena, would you please? Okay.
Yeah, I did that.
Yeah, let me do that.
Well, can you control, or should I find someone to?
It shows that you have already turned on your camera.
Yeah, it's on. Here it's on. I don't know. I can't see why I can't see myself there.
I think that's okay. We probably start our speech.
Yeah, we can
How
take
about that?
So all our speakers will stay, so we can take group photo later.
Sure.
Okay.
So
just feel free to see your camera.
Great. Now let me introduce our first speaker of the session, Professor Ankit Tam. Professor Tam is a professor of finance at RMIT University and vice president of the Australian China Business Council Victoria. He was previously deputy pro-vice chancellor at RMIT and deputy dean of the Faculty of Business and Economic, Monash University, and served in the Treasury Department of the Australian Commonwealth Government. He has held visiting and adjunct appointment at different universities and has been a consultant and advisor for many international organizations and corporations. Professor Tam has been conducting extensive research on China's economy and finance for over 35 years, has certainly seen a lot of changes in his domestic and international economic development. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ankit Tam.
Thank you, Selena, for your introduction. And I'm very glad and honored to be able to share a little bit of my thought and observation. This is an interesting topic I was given to look at the, Australia-China economic future through the lens of geopolitics and geoeconomics. I think everybody had a fair idea what geopolitics means, but geoeconomics is a fairly new notion. Actually, according to most people, it first emerged in 1990, used by a US strategist on the eve of the fall of the Berlin Wall. But then there is over the year, haven't been used very much, but in recent year, it had been quite a popular terminology, but there's really no consistent and widely accepted definition. But I'll just perhaps look at two that might help us acquire some kind of understanding why, in fact, we even have this notion coming into our everyday language now. There are two very senior American fellow in the United States Council on Foreign Affairs. They, Blackville and Harris, they published a book called Geoeconomics and Statecraft, published by Harvard University Press in 2017. Their aim is to, in fact, try to convince the US government to change their foreign policy priorities and directions. And what they are saying is that geoeconomics need to be the new statecraft of kind of war in terms of or competition or whatever you call it. So what they are saying is that in geoeconomics, we would use economic instruments to promote and defend national interests and to produce the desired geopolitical outcomes for the country using it. So, and basically what they're arguing is that for the US to stay ahead as the world's leading economy and leading nation, and to stay ahead of China's as a rising power, they need to use geoeconomics means. And more recently, our colleagues at ANU, led by Professor Andrea Roberts, she had proposed a more nuanced, I guess, definition of geoeconomics in 2018. And what she's saying is that geoeconomics basically is the new geoeconomic world order. And this is represented by the increased convergence of economics and security. She's a lawyer, so she's very much looking at things from a lawyer's point of view, but I think it's a very useful thing, because what she's arguing is that, the US administration had been now using of economic security, security, and then the idea, the U.S. administration, is to promote and protect its technology and manufacturing sector for economic reasons, and to I guess in a way to allow them to stay ahead of the game, according to this notion of these two notions, whether it is from the two American writers or from the ANU group. But at the end of the day, for Australia, how do we then navigate in this geopolitical and geoeconomic sort of contests that are being played out between the two largest economies in the world? And knowing that, I'm sure some of you who had gone through this morning's and early this afternoon session would have been learning a lot of the statistics, but I'll say that again anyway. The economic security concern of America is really basically, firstly, to maintain the technological leadership in terms of innovation and advanced technology, and secondly, to maintain some kind of security in the supply chain, particularly with regard to manufacturing industry. Whereas, I guess, in Australia, I just like to throw out the question whether Australia's economic security is the same, aligned with the same kind of priority interest as the US. I think we need to think a little bit more about that, because unlike the US, which had incurred a trade deficit with China for most of the year, in fact, for all the years since the Chinese economic reform, Australia is on the other side of the spectrum. We in Australia have been having a trade surplus with China for a long time. And in fact, last year, the trade surplus is a record level of $77 billion, which is in itself amazing. And of course, Australia now, latest statistics suggest that we export 40% of all our export are going to China, 48%. And just the goods export itself to China would account for 8.5% of our GDP. So these are China-Australia economic partnership is very significant to Australia. And particularly for the last 20 years or so, it kind of almost underwritten the growing prosperity of Australia. So I think all parties in Australia had acknowledged that fact. So given all this, And there's a lot of debate over the last 10, 15 years, whether we have to choose between US and China. I'm not an expert on geopolitics, but being a person who is interested and been working on economics and finance for so long, I can only look at it from the economics perspective and to I suppose share some of my thoughts. Well, if Australia depends so much on China in terms of our economic development and growth and our prosperity, I guess. So how do we navigate the current, quite, as Selina has also mentioned, this tension created by this geopolitics and geoeconomics that being played out by both countries, by both China and the US. Of course, US is more powerful in the instrument and tools that they have at hand. And what do Australia need to do? I suppose if we all, I think one of the things is that I think some studies, particularly some studies by the ANU have recently pointed out that, which is very interesting finding, I think quite interesting, because it really, although the group there are basically legal scholars, but they have got make a very interesting point, saying that in terms of the geoeconomics measure that China and US took, they are quite different. They noted that they observed that the US basically want to protect its technology and manufacturing base. So therefore, they are willing to get themselves exempted by the requirement of some of the multilateral trade and investment rules. So they are not unhappy to not abide with those international so-called rules. But they are very much still a free marketeer in terms of data flow and services. Whereas China is the other way around. The Chinese are more interested in free trade because it really had underwritten their rapid economic growth over the last 30 years or so. But they are much more restrictive in terms of data flow. And of course, now we all think that, well, data is the new goal, right? So data is really so important for our daily life. So in that case, in both sides, there are protection measures verging on protectionism. The two concepts are not the same, of course. And now, how do Australia, as a nation far away from these two major trading partners, what are we going to do? How can we maintain our prosperity and our economic well-being? What do we need to play the same game of geoeconomics? In my view, we don't need to, because we had been, I suppose, a lucky country for so long, and we have got minerals, and we have got great land to produce agricultural products which are world competitive. So, and we don't really need to worry about the US worry of protecting their leading position in sort of technological development. Of course, we have to protect our own property rights and IP. That's of course, everybody would do the same anyway. But that means that, in my view, the need to play geoeconomics is probably much less and much urgent than, say, in US or other bigger countries. But then, given that, then how do we navigate the geopolitics being played out by the US and China, and how to maintain a healthy economic development and how can we manage relations with China. I guess my personal observation is that Australia really had a very high quality and high standard, professional, particularly professional and independent judiciary and regulatory institution. We really should trust them a little bit more to do the job. So if there are any national security concern, they should do the job. We should believe in let our public service, let our lawyer, our court do the job, and the regulator to do the job of monitoring and screening for us as well. So in that sense, do we really need to make a choice? I don't think that we need to make a choice, but we need to, I think Australia would not change our alliance in terms of defense, particularly in terms of defense and strategic interest with the US, because this is a long established alliance. So there is no way, whatever happened, that Australia will change that. So the only thing we can do and we need to do is to do a better job in maintaining good and productive economic relationship with China. And to do that, we need to, I think ultimately, we need to take some risk. I always teach my students, if you don't take risk, you never make any profit. I mean, this is economics 101. So how do we do that? Well, so you have to assess what is important, what is really strategic, what is really sensitive as far as we are concerned, that we require more scrutiny, and be open about it and be fair about it. I think that would help our trading partner to see us not as a partisan kind of party to some outside power, but we are our own master here. And we can handle things ourselves in a very judicial and independent and fair way. I think that would earn trust and respect from all our partners or foe, whoever, because if we do our job properly and we have competitiveness in the things that we trade, then we should not worry too much. That's my take. So maybe I should stop here. I have got my 15 minutes worth.
Thank you, Professor Pan. Thank you for your excellent assessment and analysis of big picture issues and insightful perspectives and observations. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Jian Yang to present. Dr. Yang is a former member of the Parliament of New Zealand. Dr. Yang served as chair of the Education and the Science Select Committee, chair of the Governance and Administration Select Committee, deputy chair of the Health Select Committee. Prior to being elected as a member of Parliament, Dr. Yang was a senior academic at the University of Auckland. Roles included Director of the China Studies Center at the New Zealand Asia Institute and the Chair of Auckland branch of New Zealand Institute of International Affairs. Dr. Yang will discuss New Zealand's relations with China and the US. Dr. Yang, over to you. Dr. Yang, you are on mute.
Thank you very much. I apologize for the lateness and for all the troubles. Actually, I'm now in my friend's house. I have an internet connection problem in my own home, and I'm using a brand new computer. So it became an issue. Now, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the expo for inviting me to speak in this session. I was originally asked to talk about New Zealand-Australia relationship in the Biden era. However, I believe there is nothing really very interesting in the Trans-Tasman relationship other than rugby. So I thought I should focus on New Zealand relations with China and the United States. And to some extent, we'll touch upon New Zealand's relations with Australia. Because we all know that the currently Australia-China relationship is strained. And how about New Zealand then? Now, New Zealand has been very proud of its independent foreign policy for many years. In the 1980s, its stance on nuclear issues actually ended its formal alliance with the United States. So you can see that New Zealand has always been very proud and be quite consistent in terms of emphasizing its independence in foreign policy making. As a small nation, New Zealand has always been playing a very constructive role internationally, has always emphasized the importance of multilateralism and also free trade. For that reason, we can see some central elements of New Zealand's foreign policy. One is its belief in the United Nations, its belief in a multilateral global economic order rather than closed economic blocs, and also its belief in economic and social rather than military solutions to international problems. And also, New Zealand has a strong belief in moral values such as human rights. So these central elements may explain why New Zealand has kept some distance from the Trump administration on various issues, particularly because the Trump administration has moved actually to the opposite of multilateralism. And these central elements have remained unchanged largely for decades. What has changed quite substantially is New Zealand's interactions with various regions and countries. So New Zealand used to export most of its goods to its mother country, Britain. While the bonds with Britain remain at many levels, Britain is no longer an important trading partner to New Zealand. Strategically and commercially, what happens in East Asia today is of vital importance to New Zealand. In terms of goods and services trade, 6 East Asian countries have been among New Zealand's top 10 largest trading partners for many years. They are China, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Thailand, and Malaysia. China is, of course, the largest trading partner of New Zealand. Now, so it is simply logical for New Zealand actually to be fully engaged with East Asia. And this explains why New Zealand has been keen to be involved in a major regional architectures in East Asia, such as East Asia Summit, and recently Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Now, New Zealand has had a quite strong relationship with China for at least 2 decades, I would say 2 or 3 decades. As a member of parliament for 9 years, I was privileged to be able to witness and make some contribution to such a strong relationship. New Zealand has a few firsts in its relationship with China. New Zealand was the very first developed country to conclude its negotiation with regard to China's accession to World Trade Organization. And also, New Zealand was the very first developed country to recognize China's full market economy status. New Zealand was also the first to start, to conclude, and to implement a free trade agreement with China. So New Zealand really can be very proud in terms of its relations with China. Well, nevertheless, New Zealand faces some challenges, some major challenges. Two of the major challenges are, firstly, how to balance its economic interests with its moral responsibility. And secondly, how to balance between China and the United States. Generally speaking, New Zealand has to somehow balance its what we call bedrock relationships, like with China, with US, with Australia, with even the Pacific Island countries, and also balance balanced relationship with these countries, and a strong stake in effective multilateralism and the rule of international law. Now, in the past 3 years, New Zealand was led by a Labour-led coalition government. I would say the government, under this coalition government, New Zealand moved a bit closer to the United States and irritated China on a few occasions. While they reflected some new thinking in Wellington, these movements were largely led by the Labour Party's coalition partner, then Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Winston Peters, and his New Zealand First Party. Overall, the coalition government did not seriously risk New Zealand's relations with China, particularly in the second half of its 3-year term. So New Zealand may find it easier to balance its relations with the United States and China in the Biden era, while the current strategic rivalry between the two great powers will continue and may even deepen. The Biden administration's policies towards China and global issues are likely to be more predictable and less unilateral. The change of the American administration coincided with important political changes in New Zealand. In a general election held just over a month ago, the New Zealand Labour Party won the majority, and the New Zealand First Party failed to return to Parliament. This means that the Labour Party, Labour government, will have more room to maneuver in foreign policy making. On the side of China, what is certain is that Beijing has given up an illusion that China's relations with the United States will return to the years before Trump. While the Chinese leaders are quite confident these days, we say increasingly confident, they also understand the weaknesses of China, and therefore they will take opportunities to stabilize its relationship with the United States. But they are prepared for the worst, however, and will remain firm and uncompromising on issues like Taiwan. So this can be a challenge to New Zealand. A stable New Zealand-China relationship will be based on mutual trust and strong economic relationship. China used to perceive New Zealand as a very reliable, trustworthy partner. This perception has been compromised a bit, but still New Zealand is in a good position to deepen its relationship with China. Economically, China is New Zealand's largest trading partner. Before the pandemic, China was New Zealand's second largest trade source of international tourists and the largest source of international students. The post-pandemic economic recovery is the priority of the current or newly elected Labour government, and China plays a key role. Some people are talking about, reducing New Zealand's economic reliance or dependence on China. The reality is that China is a market that New Zealand businesses find it hard to leave, and particularly when other countries are still dealing with its economic issues because of the pandemic. So economic relations can hardly be separated from political and strategic relations. So this, again, is a challenge. It will remain a challenge to many countries, including New Zealand. So New Zealand will find it challenging to have a comprehensive relationship with China. Politically, the New Zealand government is likely to continue to emphasize New Zealand's support for moral issues like human rights. Strategically, the New Zealand government will keep New Zealand's close relationship with its traditional friends or even allies. At the same time, New Zealand will try to maintain its independent foreign policy and walk a fine line between various interests. The current Labour government now has a better understanding of China and is more experienced in dealing with China issues. Well, more importantly, New Zealand has found a common interest in promoting free trade and multilateralism with China. So this can be a good basis for two countries to further their relationship. Australia and New Zealand, we'll see. Now, Australia and New Zealand have adopted different approaches towards China on various issues. The Australia-China relationship has been rather strained, while New Zealand has maintained a rather stable relationship with China. There are multiple reasons why the two countries have adopted rather different approaches, and I'm not real well positioned to actually delve into this. The two countries' different approaches towards China, and to some extent, the United States is likely to continue to some degree. Some differences are likely, and so such differences are unlikely to hurt the bilateral relationship between New Zealand and Australia. After all, New Zealand is has a very strong bond with Australia, but nothing should be taken for granted. Now, after all, New Zealand is a member of Five Eyes, and also New Zealand has its obligations under the ANZUS Treaty, that is Australia, New Zealand, and United States Security Treaty. So New Zealand will have to balance its conflicting interests. Nevertheless, I believe the Trans-Tasman relationship is special, and the bond between the two countries are very strong. And for Australia is New Zealand's closest ally, and I would believe the two countries will stay close. So to conclude, I would say New Zealand's independent foreign policy has served its national interest well. It will continue to balance between the great powers and also between its conflicting interests. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yang, for sharing your valuable insights on the New Zealand's multilateral ties with China, Australia, and the US. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Andrew Chen, who will discuss the Greater Bay Area strategy, developments, and opportunities. Professor Chen is a professor of practice in marketing at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, where he served as the director of EMBA programming from 2002 to 2020, the head of Shaw College from 2010 to 2020. He has recently been appointed as vice chairman of the board of the Greater Bay Area Business College. Professor Chen excels in teaching, was awarded the Vice Chancellor's and Zamparo Teaching Award in 2001 and 2009. He has conducted forums and seminars for many multinational corporations and large Hong Kong companies. Professor Chen has been active in participating in public services, in recognizing of his distinguished public and community service. He was appointed as a Justice of the Peace in 2005 by the Hong Kong SAR government. Please welcome Professor Chen.
First of all, I'm very happy to be invited by Selena to this very important conference. In a minute, you will see a lot of slides, but I think the most important thing would be the caption. And then I'll go to some of the very important or salient dimensions in the PowerPoint. So this is pretty comprehensive. And if participants would like to go in depth, please contact me. First of all, I think the title is very timely. New path beyond the new normal, and then from geopolitics to geoeconomics. We are all situated in different contexts, subject to a lot of influences, and we are also instilling a lot of influence into the whole system. So let me talk about the Greater Bay Area context. My title is the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area. What's in it for us? I know there are around 100 participants today, and a lot of them will be interested in listening to threats, opportunity, so on and so forth. What is GBA? GBA comprises 9 territories in the Guangdong area, in addition to Hong Kong and Macau. Basically, this is a directive all the way from the top, so it's political in a sense. It's the vice versa. It's not a lot of people in the market, they sense that there are opportunities, and then they gather together, finding a leader and then leading them. It's basically different places, people would have different motives, they're in different contexts, having different value, objective, strategy, and tactic. And a lot, often time, they would cancel each other, and they would not be able to generate new opportunities. So this is a directive, but that directive is not without support. This is an important document guiding the development of GPA, major 6 principles. Drive by innovation and led by reform. To me, I think it's led by reform, and then we look at, see how this particular arrangement can lead to a lot of innovations. Coordinate development and plan holistically is a Chinese custom that we look at the back first, the end first. It's a plan holistically and then coordinate development. But the thing is, even though it's planned holistically, we require very good coordination, and people should work wholeheartedly. First of all, from their own perspective, and then to a coalition perspective, and then to the nationwide perspective, and more importantly, in an international global perspective. Oftentimes we talk about green development, ecological, and all that. The key would be on win-win outcome. As oftentimes we will see people talking about the country first. And then when you are the first, and everybody would be working for you, and then they subside, and then they are subordinate, basically that would not be a good idea. It's not motivating all the resources in the whole world, and then the talents, the mind power to coming up with a better world. I think coming up with a better world would be a better definition of coalition. And then share between the benefits of development and improving people's livelihood. I think it's a more, I would say, not hidden, but very basic value behind all that. It's not local development. It's not local people's livelihood. It's the development and livelihood of at least 2 regions working together. And then the 11 regions working together. And then that 11 regions combining with the whole national direction, and then with the hope of realizing how we can create a better world. It's only under that sort of mentality that we can do a much better job. And then the interesting part is why Hong Kong and Macau, these 2 particular special economic zones are being included, is because the ultimate aim is one Belt, One Road, and then how that would bring into context, linking the whole system with the whole outside world. And that's the ultimate meaning of the GBA initiative. Greater Bay Area, 71 billion people, 56,000 kilometers square. In 2018, combined GDP 1.6 trillion. And then in 2030, the estimated GPA would reach 4.6 trillion. So according to a book written by Jim Collins, it's too big to fall. How can you avoid you're doing business, you're cooperating with such a big system? Of course, which Professor has just rightly mentioned, protection and all that. To us, I think it's the value first. with professional advisors from like lawyers, accountant, and then we have to take care. But it's not taking care first and then do nothing. The Greater Bay Area concept, explore synergy. That's the basic idea. Synergy between Hong Kong and the rest of the 10 regions, and then how the whole thing we integrate into the whole China context, the whole China context integrated into the world context. New economy coexists with a sound industries foundation. Previously, it's the region are kind of a combination of different regions having their own industry foundation. And now it's there a way for us to integrate all that and complying with the new and old economy, the technology, so to speak. Openness is the key. Another book written by a Greek author called Thomas Friedman, written in 2005, also mentioned about the Berlin Wall, as the world is flat. Water will flow from a height to a lower region, to a lower level. It's basically so difficult for you to control people having cooperation with others. So openness would be the virtue. Openness would be the direction. But of course, in internationalizations, there are so many political stands, and then also a lot of concerns. And then, of course, these are some of the hurdles we have to address. This is pretty tough, but never mind, just look at the basics. It's institutional diversity, creates room for institutional innovation. So first of all, look at the sentence in the middle, GBA as international financial centers and shipping centers. I think the most important word would be highly market-oriented environment. Is to meet the needs and wants of tomorrow, conceive of how to meet those needs and wants, putting that into a market system. But after that, we need manufacturing. So at the end of the day, even for 4P within marketing, we need a product. You need manufacturing. And then how to come up with a better product, better service is through technological innovation. But Hong Kong would play a very strong role as a financial center and also shipping center. So at the end, you just look at GBA and all those, the debt access, total area 5.65. Big means it's a big base. And then people, 6,765,000. More people, that means a bigger market and also having a bigger talent pool. We are now for GDP is in the middle. So I'm a very optimistic person. When you're middle, there are potentials for you to grow and you are not too small. And then when you look at the GDP growth, it's 7.9%. That's something we can not neglect. And then even though we are now per capita GPA is 2.604, but there are a lot of room for us to grow, especially when you look at the port throughput. It's 6,520. There's a big potential there. And then the share of service, 62.2. Compared to the rest, the service amounting to like 80 something. That would means a lot of rooms for people from afar, people in another economic system, coming and work together with GBA, try to create something of value there. We need services like finance, like so to speak, and also technology. So the next one, even more complex, is just a graph mentioning the particulars of different regions. Pinpointing, first of all, Guangzhou, the capital, is a great transport hub. Shenzhen, famous for the city for innovation. For Macau, tourism and leisure center. Hong Kong is a big list. International financial center, transportation, trade center, aviation hub, imagine you see. Just now, Doctor has mentioned something like the legal regime that's extremely important. When we separate all four, no power at all. So that's the old common saying, united we stand. Okay. And then the next one is talking about how different regions can be, would have their own particular advantages and how we combine the rest. I will skip this one. But if you need going to very detail, please give me a call. I've just mentioned the whole initiative is also one of the national initiatives. It's called the Belt Road Initiative. When we combine Hong Kong and Macau with the 9 regions that form the origin, at least in the Hong Kong, in the Greater Bay Area context, another origin of the Belt Road Initiative. 5 characteristics is diversity, meaning opportunity. Manufacturing heavy industry structures, it was there. Different people are doing different things from a manufacturing heavy industry structure. But room for growth, infrastructural development, in the sense that the railroad, the train system, and then the 4th one is a challenge. Even though you mentioned 9+2, but division of work, who would be the leader, who would support who, that's the big story. But if that system is not in China, I don't think anybody can do something like this. You just look at the election system now in America, you know, it's so complicated. So hopefully we can come up with a good division of work. And innovation potential, there are a lot of R&Ds there. Hong Kong is very good in very advanced, very top level, but they are not very good putting them into practices. Hope that with the 9+2 concept, we can perform much better. Decoding in then 2022, 2035, and then it will go very deep and then go very, very wide. So I'll skip this one. The key points. The next dimensions would be advanced manufacturing industry is raising from the original structure, original situation to advanced manufacturing in order to compete in the global arena, in order to form coalitions with, say, for example, Australia, New Zealand. If we are not advanced enough, if we are not thinking about improvement, our potential would be hindered. And strategic emerging industry would be another dimension, like IT, biotech. Services needs to be modernized. So with the 9+2 particular initiative, we may be able to do something because of the synergistic combination. And marine economy might be another one. Strategic emerging industries, the pillar industries, like I just mentioned, IT, biotech. And then when I understand that 100 participants are there, with some very great scholars I'm partnering with, I think we can come up with robotic, healthcare, high-tech services. According to my research, like at least for Australia, you're very good in finance, very good in like banking, so to speak. I might go to there in Q&A session. These are the situations in China at one moment in time. It's around 3 years ago. Technology and innovation, trade and logistics, financial services, real estates, and all that. So if you are in that industry, you have a lot of pioneer working in front of you. And then even though you are in education, retail, health, and all that, that means you have big potentials there. So key points market is another major dimension. If not, Hong Kong would not be included. So I'll just put it here. It's the traditional way how to develop financial industries. And these are the different dimensions. If you are in infrastructure financing, asset management, cross-border finance, fintech, insurance, banking, so on and so forth. And then GPA funding will be another dimension. Getting fund, IPOs, and all that. Another dimensions I might want to talk a little bit about is a quality production and living circle. So it's not just a place for business. It's a place for us to live in. Business-friendly environment and tourist-friendly. So there are so many dimensions we can approach. coalitions between two different nations there would be a possible and a very, I would say, favorable outcome. Measures to promote development education. I'm in education, Selena is also in education. And then as far as education is concerned, there are so many ways that we can cooperate, like joining forces on academic programs, research, vocational training, and alliance of university, Hong Kong, Macau, Guangdong. If you can combine people, combine universities, like our MIT, like U of Melbourne, so on and so forth, that will bring a lot of, I would say, benefits, not just to China, but also to the whole world. And hopefully that would also raise the profile of like universities in New Zealand and also in Australia. Basic education, forming of sister schools, and then hopefully equal access to education. Having Hong Kong as the middleman, we are basically good at both, but we just don't have the one context. Development talent pool, meaning the talent, the technical talent, international talent, which is so important. Not just technical, we need cooperations, we need joining force with people outside China, outside the GBA. Talents are so badly needed. Tourism is another dimension we might want to explore. GBA outlook, flow of various factors, including people. That is to say, in the Taoism system is like water. Water will flow to a place whereby it can be beneficial to a lot of like plants, people, so on and so forth. The world is flat, cooperations. But of course, professional, like the regime, like professional services, like CPA, legal are so important. Alternative dispute resolutions, mediation, arbitrations are also needed. Regional coordination, and then industrial cooperation. IP is another dimension. If you are an IP lawyer, you will be working 24 hours. If you are in GBA, you have a lot of work to do. Competitive neutrality, I think, is the mentality. In the last 30 seconds, I'm going to talk about why Hong Kong. Hong Kong, highly international. Business environment, capital free flow, trusted common law system. So when we are in the common law system, New Zealand, UK, Australia, we talk basically the same language, common law and the rule of law, and robust technology, intellectual property regime. Use Hong Kong as a place to sign the contract with in disputes. That would be a trial in the Hong Kong court. That would be another example. Civil tax regime, free port, top-notch university, and then international financial center. There are, of course, a lot of top-notch university both in Australia and New Zealand. But by joining force, I think we can go to new promised lands. Last one, financial services, we want international innovation, especially when China is such a big market. Legal services, I think we need to beef up there. And then convenient flow of good services with the travel, with the transportation system, with the marine hub in Yantian, in Shenzhen, and also in Hong Kong. I think we can play a very big role. Promote Hong Kong, big hopefully, talent hub. Youth development would be another dimension. That couldn't be overemphasized. And not the least is the planet. We talk too much on profit, not too much on people, and very little about environment. Hope that would form another initiative in the GBA context. I think that's all I would like to share. I'm happy to take questions in the Q&A sessions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Chen, for the very informative and comprehensive presentation and the opportunities you pointed out. I'm sure our audience will take away a lot of information and your insightful view. Thanks again, Professor Chen.
Thank you.
Now let's welcome our last but not least speaker, Mr. Dao Gaffey. Mr. Gaffey is a national board member of ACBC. He has advised the Northern Territory Chief Minister's Department, and other Northern Territory ministers on China matters. Mr. Garvey was an invited speaker at ASEAN and APEC conferences in China to present on Belt and Road policies in China, Singapore, and Australia, and was the Australian representative on the Silk Road Chambers of International Commerce. He is also the author of China for SMEs, Essential Elements of Success, February 2020 release, and 8 financial market books. He is a regular media commentator for CGTN and CNBC. That was present on China's post-COVID developments and their impacts, dual circulation economy, a digital approach to a cross-border trade using the RMB, and the future Belt and Road activities. Please welcome Mr. Garvey.
Thank you, Selena. I should not have made that mistake. One of the side effects of COVID has been the global isolation of China, not in a political sense, but in a personal sense. Now, like many people here, I've not seen Chinese friends or colleagues for nearly a year. Sure, we keep in contact by WeChat and Zoom, but it's no substitute for the feel and the impressions that you get when you're walking the streets of Beijing or Shanghai or Dunhuang, or from face-to-face meetings with colleagues at conference and trade events. For those whose only contact with China is via Australian media, right-wing foreign-funded think tanks, or ill-informed politicians, the isolation and disconnect is even greater and more dangerous because their ill-founded opinions have an undue influence on the development of Australian policy, and they contribute to the Australian missteps in the Australia-China relationship. This lack of contact at all levels contributes to the feeling that China, like Australia, has entered a period of extended hibernation where not much has happened. The substantial Chinese recovery seen in recent months barely rates a mention in Australia. That is more than unfortunate. It is a critical error in our assessment of the way that the world is changing and that will change post-COVID. China has not hibernated. China has accelerated development in critical areas that change the post-COVID landscape for China trade relations with the world and with Australia in particular. We already see some of the hard edge of this as Australians wake up to the fact that many of our products are not unique and that they can be substituted by the Chinese with other products sourced elsewhere. To be sure, these trade actions serve a dual purpose, but they also reflect changes in China's engagement with the world. Correct labelling of food products, for instance, is critical. Enhanced COVID-related quarantine procedures must be adhered to, and ignorance of these new standards is no excuse. There are 3 critical areas that redefine China's relations with the world and set a post-COVID environment in which Australian trade will take place. The first of these areas is President Xi's concept of the dual circulation economy. The second is the introduction of the digital RMB and the way that this disrupts the virtual monopoly of trade settlement by using advanced blockchain solutions. The third is the way these 2 developments enhance the Belt and Road initiatives, and these are not incompatible with the RCEP agreement that was signed last week. Let's start with the dual circulation economy and the way that this rests on a digital economy. The concept has 2 equally strong components: internal circulation, which refers to domestic economic activities, and the Greater Bay Area is a good example of that, and then external circulation, which relates to China's economic links with the outside world. And this is where there's some important change that is taking place. The dual circulation policy signaled that China wants to reduce the role of international trade in its economy and strengthen its domestic economy. As Geoff Raby points out in his book, China's Grand Strategy and Australia's Future in the New Global Order, China is uniquely vulnerable in its trade. Now, Raby talks about the vulnerability of the physical choke points of trade in the Straits of Malacca and the South China Sea. He does not talk about the critical choke point that was exposed in 2008 with the global financial crisis. China's dependence on the SWIFT settlement system to complete trade transactions in US dollars is a point of extreme vulnerability. President Trump has made that even more vulnerable over the last 4 years. China found in 2008 that its reserves held in US treasuries were suddenly at risk. The US dollar exposure meant that China was at the mercy of a foreign-controlled trade settlement system. And China was held hostage to the US monetary policy that effectively manipulated the US dollar, and through that, the China currency peg, the value of the RMB. Two solutions were created to break out of this choke point. The first was the New Silk Road, or what it's now called, the Belt and Road Initiative. That was first laid out for foreign audiences in 2013 at an APEC conference in Nanjing. The second and associated solution was greater independence for the RMB and the Chinese capital markets. The ultimate expression of this breaking of the chokehold is the digital RMB, China's sovereign digital currency. The Belt and Road Initiative, to a significant extent, was designed to break the dependency of holding foreign currency reserves in bank vaults in an increasingly unfriendly country. Now, the second and third solutions are so closely related that they are like lips and teeth, so we can consider them together. The Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, is first and foremost a trade engagement policy. It is not a treaty, something that Australian politicians at the federal level seem incapable of understanding. The original name, New Silk Road, reached back into the Tang Dynasty with its physical trade, but the concept rests on the way China has always preferred to manage its trade and security relationships. Belt and Road Initiative, New Silk Road, is very much about border security. The Chinese trade system was a system of tribute built around mutual trade and the right, but not the obligation, to trade with China. China exchanged goods with its neighbours in return for its neighbours not threatening China's borders. China used trade as a method of ensuring security against attack on China by the surrounding states. That's not an historical curiosity. This is a philosophical foundation of the Belt and Road Initiative, where the objective is to secure borders through an enhancement of peaceful trade relationships with surrounding states. Essential to these relationships is a common set of protocols and procedures for cross-border transactions so trade is smooth. the RCEP agreements are consistent with and compatible with these Belt and Road objectives. Australia and some others have focused on just one aspect of BRI, and that's the construction of physical infrastructure. This focus ignores the other elements which create a soft infrastructure. These include trade infrastructure with its regulatory environment, soft infrastructure with payment protocols, blockchain certification, and capital infrastructure with investment and trade settlement. By way of a summary, to put these concepts together very quickly and easily, when you build a high-speed railway in Malaysia, you also adopt the software to run the trains, the software to handle the ticketing, the software to manage the timetables and maintain the tracks. All of this rests on advanced high-tech 5G and blockchain services. And it's Huawei that has the capacity to deliver those standards that are required. That has some interesting implications to Australia's refusal to engage with Huawei. When trade settlement is conducted in US dollars, then the entire trade structure is at the mercy of an unfriendly tweet from Trump or from the incoming President Biden. The development of capital independence is essential if the BRI is to achieve its smooth trade objectives. Now, part of that comes from expanding Shanghai as a global trading centre where foreign capital is used to expand China's economy. It mimics what the US has done for decades with its stock exchanges, attracting international capital. Another part of that process comes from creating a sovereign currency trade settlement system, a system that is not dependent upon a third party. It is not dependent upon the SWIFT settlement system. It is not dependent upon the CHIPS, the CHIPS system within the United States that completes counterparty transactions. This means that the trade settlement cannot be held to ransom by unilateral sanctions. The digital RMB, currently only rolled out for domestic use, is the forerunner of an enhanced cross-border trade settlement system that is built on a blockchain foundation. The success of BRI rests upon this foundation, and that takes us directly to RCEP. The RCEP is an agreement to establish agreed cross-border trade and settlement procedures. China has already established the outline of those processes with many of the 15 member countries that Australia has ambitions to trade with. If Australia decides to take Biden's advice, issued just a few days ago, and align with other US allies so that they can set the rules of the road, Biden's words, not mine, then Australia will walk out of COVID hibernation into a world where trade with China and nations within our region is measurably more difficult. If we do not understand the digital standards and the cross-border transaction standards that are already in place and in common use amongst BRI members, then our ships and our services will go to the back of the line because we do not use the new standards and protocols. China has not stood still while our engagement went into COVID hibernation. Australian business and organisations like the Australia-China Business Council and government must quickly recognise the urgent need to accept reality and to catch up, because post-COVID China is no longer business as usual. It is not the same as it was pre-COVID. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gabi, for sharing your understanding of the structured engagement priorities of China. Before we move into Q&A session, let's take a photo, a group photo of speakers. Please look at your camera. 3, 2, 1. All done. Thank you. Now we have about 10 minutes for the Q&A session, and we will direct 4 to 5 questions for our speakers, probably 1 question for each speaker. We have a very good question coming from our audience. Is the present geopolitics that adversely affect economic engagements going to change in near future? Is the diversification of Australia's export market the answer to the present challenges? Can we direct this question to Professor Tam?
Okay. I hope I understand your question well. Are there any change expected in the near future, right?
Yes.
It depends what you mean by changes, I guess. In terms of the external environment, I agree with Daryl that China has changed a lot already with the new 5-year plan as well. So, but I don't think in terms of the US trade and other strategic position will change very much even with a new administration. Even if there is change, it will take some time to materialize. And I don't think that will come to pass so easily. In terms of the second question, which is part of what you are saying, is whether diversification of the economic global engagement for Australia is a viable pathway for us to pursue. I don't think in the short run we can diversify. Where do you find such a large market to replace a country that buys 49% of our export? I don't see that. Both in commodity trade and in services like education and tourism, we cannot find another one right away, even if they exist. I mean, people talk about India. I mean, India would take a long time to catch up to China in terms of economic size, and their demand structure might not be similar to China. So at the moment, I think diversification is always good. We can diversify risk, but that's in principle. But in reality, we have better do a better job in serving the existing market. I think that's my answer.
Thank you, Professor Tam. Dr. Yang, thank you for sharing the key features of New Zealand's success in maintaining strong trade relations with China, while continuing its strong historical alliances with US and Australia. So my question is, can New Zealand's success be emulated by other countries such as Australia?
Okay, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, so really, because different countries have different policies, now it depends on their own situation. New Zealand is a small nation, and therefore New Zealand really values multilateralism and free trade. Well, Australia, of course, also values multilateralism and free trade, but Australia is a much bigger country. They tend to call it middle power and regional power. So their perceptions can be different from New Zealand's perceptions of the world. And also their sense of responsibility can be different from that of New Zealand. And they have, Australia, for example, is ally of the United States, while New Zealand is very close to the United States, but the official alliance ended in the 1980s, although New Zealand, as I said, is still close to the United States. So New Zealand, you know, so the size of the country, the strength of the country, they are different, and therefore they have different perceptions, different world views, and different foreign policy. But on the other hand, I think other countries might try to understand why New Zealand has been able to balance its complete interests in its relationship with China. So other countries might learn something, but on the other hand, I won't say that you know, all other countries should be able to learn from New Zealand, because different countries have different situations.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. And I'd like to have the same question to Mr. Gabi and Professor Tan. What do you think?
I tend to agree, but we need to remember that we can't quickly diversify. And the idea that we diversify is supposed to be a way of managing risk of our so-called over-dependence upon China. It doesn't recognize the reality. How do you manage the risk? One is to establish new markets, and that's the line that Australia is taking. The other, of course, is to reduce the level of conflict between you and your main market. Now, an important issue here is that, and it was alluded to in a number of previous conversations, that Australia's criticism of China has not been well received. Now, the question must be, is it the content of the criticism, or is it the manner in which that criticism has been delivered? And I would suspect that it's the manner in which that criticism has been delivered. It causes a tremendous loss of face. And if China, for instance, had scolded Australia in the same way, then can you imagine people like Andrew Bolt and the mainstream media, what their reaction would be. So the resolution to your question comes not from finding alternative markets, but from working more effectively to engage with your existing market, because the primary risk does not come from supply chains. The primary risk comes at the political level, where we have now encouraged China to actively look for substitute sources of products that we used to think were unique to Australia.
Can I add a few words here? In terms of diversification of market, it is easy or good for government to say, oh, we should rely dependence, or we should reduce dependence on particular country. But for businesses, they pursue profit. So it is hard for them to simply leave and find another one. It's not so easy. And secondly, I agree with Mr. Gabi. Is that the surname? Yes. Really, when you come to China issue, it is important to understand your attitude, your approach. The Chinese government often says that, oh, we look at your approach. If it's constructive, we tend to be, tend to receive that more constructively. So indeed, we need to understand the Chinese culture, and also we need to understand how to deliver your message.
And in that sense, maybe I add another point there. Even in Japan, there are a lot of underlying animosity. But I mean, Japan government handle their economic relations with China much better than Australia does, I think.
Right. Japan has serious issues with China, whether we're talking about Senkaku Islands or South China Sea, but the relationship and the engagement is far superior to that of Australia.
Yeah, and Japan, don't forget, Japan actually is the, if you want to talk about geopolitics, is the, aircraft carrier from the US in Asia. And still, it does very well in terms of doing business with China.
Thank you, Professor Tan, Dr. Yang, and Mr. Gabi. The pandemic is bringing massive challenges for business and business leaders. Key business fundamentals like how employees work, how customers behave, how supply chains function, and sustainability have been shaken. So this question addressed to Professor Andrew Chen. What's your view of what business leaders need to concentrate on under the new normal? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes. Well, I'm a professor. So basically, I will look from my eyes to the whole world. As education, communication, sharing of ideas, understanding what others are doing, their motive, their underlying objectives, the do's and don'ts, and collectively we combine everything together. But before answering that, perhaps I'll answer one of your questions you raised to us previously, is the Joe Biden regime, vis-a-vis, of course, Daryl has rightly pointed out the Trump administrations and all that. Personally, I think people are tired of Trump's administration. For 4 years, and then a lot of things that perhaps for Trump is logical, for me it's unthinkable. But you see, every day we listen to things that's out of our expectation, out of our logical set. I think people are so tired and they want to go back to normal. And I have something, I usually, as a marketing professor, I study psychology. When I listen to Joe Biden mentioning something like this, even though he's talking to Trump, I think he's also talking to other people in the whole world. We are just opponents. We are not enemies. So just for nations, if we are not enemies, there are so many things that we can cooperate, even though we need protection. And then for protection's sake, of course, Dr. Young has also rightly mentioned, like people would not understand each other. I think the business people should talk more with government. If they can, and government should talk more with business people. If they are not in a very good position, I think some people in between, like universities, like professional people, consultant, consulate, chambers, think tank, they can play a very good role in translating terms into concepts and belonging to the other group. If the government and business people are thinking on a different level of concepts, basically there is nothing we can do. And hopefully university can play a role there by offering conferences, like talks, seminars, something like this one. Basically, I learned a lot of things today. So to me, I think we have to go back to education. Education not meaning only university, but in press, in social media, and then in a lot of conferences so that we can share ideas. And to me, even though I spent a lot of time, I present some rosy picture. My concern is, after this seminar, people will go back to stage one, back to square one. And then they just work on their own. And they are not listening to people, not talking to people. And then the whole idea, even though it's under a very strong political or policy inclination, nothing will happen. And then hopefully if we have a positive mind, and then we are having the wisdom, I think the world will be much better after Trump. So that would be my 2 cents.
Thank you, Professor Chen. I cannot agree more. I think it's certainly a collective effort. You know, it's coming from business, public, and private sectors. Let's working together so we will achieve a better outcome. Thank you to all of our session 4 speakers today. You have provided very insightful views and enlightening comments for us. Thank you very much. So this session concludes.
Now we have got another question from our attendee. Do you want to?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Can you see? I sent you the private message.
Sure, I just, let me have a look.
Copy.
Yes, I have seen the message. Would you like me to answer?
Sure.
Okay, for everyone else, the question is, I'm wondering how China's BRI interests in faraway places such as Africa, for example, tie in with my thesis that BRI's sole aim is the protection of China's borders. BRI's primary aim is the protection of Chinese borders, the securing of borders through trade. But it is not the only objective of BRI. BRI is an overarching policy. So there are a whole lot of other things that take place that are slipped under the cover of BRI, because that enables quicker authorization of foreign investment through NDRC and so on. It's an overall umbrella which makes life much, much easier. But the important thing to remember is, as was, and I must quote the Deputy Counsellor General, the objective of BRI is not to make Hungry Jacks sell dumplings. They will still sell hamburgers. So although there are BRI projects that are named that in Africa, that doesn't mean that that's part of the protection of China's borders. Their focus is more both on the Central Asia borders, seeing in Kazakhstan around those areas, and those borders that face the seaside on the eastern seaboard through South China Sea. So Africa is part of their broader trade policy, but not specifically part of that policy of using trade to secure borders.
Thank you, Mr. Guppy. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think we maybe take a final question. This is the question, general question for all the speakers. It looks a very big one.
Well, I have read the Q&A questions. One question's talking about relationship tensions are always two sides. I wonder if one of us kindly offer some of the tangible measures that both Canberra and China could do to prepare the relationship. So would you mind if I answer that? Okay, it's back to the basic. And when we see each other in the morning, we say good morning. When we look at people, we say hi, have a good day. So it's back to the basic is we are human beings. We want living in a happier world. So the basic tenet or the basic assumption is people are kind, but we have to protect ourselves. It's been for a long time that people will try to look at each other from a negative perspective. So when I was a young boy, I taught by my father and also by teachers that we have to be kind to others, but we have to be cautious. So I think it's the other way around. And point number two is have the wisdom. We have to look at intelligence. We have to learn. We have to listen to experts. Just like today, I listened to 3 experts, all giving me a lot of food for thought. And then when you know more about the basic scenario, if negative things, if fighting each other, finger pointing can handle a lot of things, it would be a very simplistic world. Sometimes it's creativity. I think I might want to answer that using a famous quote by Robert Kennedy. Some men see things as they are and ask why. But we should be dream of things that never were and ask why not. We have to try to go back to why not. And Daryl has mentioned some of the dimensions, I think, that can generate a lot of why nots. And then I learned also from doctor and also professors, some of the basic things that we have to be care of. And then from that point onwards, and then we try doing something that we should think about, not Hong Kong first, not EPA first. That should be the whole world first. I think perhaps as a teacher, this is something very high sounding, but I think that might address the issue. Thank you.
Well, that's a good optimistic viewpoint, Professor Chen. I'm a realist as well. But I think if we don't deal with, and I don't think we can from outside deal with the root cause of why there is this geoeconomics push. If we cannot deal with the root cause, it will still grow stronger, and that will still be creating tension. And we have to still navigate and try to make the most of how we can create space for us to continue, doing the right things and doing it for the people. I guess it's not easy. I would say I'm not as optimistic as you are.
I would say the most important thing is the perception. Each government could say, I'm doing this not because of that, it's because of this, because of that. No ill intention. But from the other side, people will see that differently. So I think whatever you do or government does should understand how the other party would perceive this. So perception is more important than what a government says. That's my view.
And if I can follow from what you've said, for Australian governments, Western governments, develop at least a basic understanding of face, because it applies not just to China, but to all of our Asian neighbours that we aim to trade with. So that's the first thing. The second, which flows from that, is to speak softly and respectfully, not grandstanding. So for instance, and I will use the example, when Australian Prime Minister Morrison stood up loudly and asked for a WHO investigation into the source of COVID. WHO, as normal practice, always investigates the source of disease outbreaks. That's what they do. So there was nothing strange or different in what Morrison was asking for, but the way in which he did it caused a loss of face. It was disrespectful. It was unnecessary. So that tells us, as the bottom line, that we need to make better use of the diplomacy and diplomatic skills that a few years ago shaped this conversation. We need to be very careful of the foreign influence, particularly in Australia, that's coming in through organisations like the Australian Security Policy Institute, which are funded by the State Department out of the US, which are pushing a foreign influence agenda. I think I'll stop there.
Thanks again to our distinguished speakers for your sharing and insights and great questions raised from our audience today. Given the time limit, this session is concluded now. Australians' engagements with China over the years in education, science, business, and culture have brought significant economic, social, and cultural dividends to both countries. Despite the current tensions, our speakers have provided insights that could help foster improved cooperation and a better outcome for all. Today's virtual conference is a good example of the things that representatives from the business and public sectors can get together to talk about the issues and how to address them. It offers a valuable opportunity to shed light rather than more heat on the complex interplay of geopolitical and geoeconomic issues. Let's stay optimistic and positive. Thank you all for participating and inputs in today's event. If you want to explore more information about AceTI, please visit our website www.aceti.com.au. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you all at AceTI 2021. Now, I'd like to close today's proceedings. I wish you all the best and look forward to seeing you all at AceTI 2021. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
这是中澳政商学界携手打造的商业盛会，这是两国最有影响力的商贸交流平台。澳中博览会20+21如约而至，将分别于2020年11月20日于线上，2021年7月22日于线下墨尔本会展中心举行。博览会组委会主席由澳大利亚前贸易投资部长安德鲁·罗布阁下担任。罗布先生在任职部长期间，推动和主导了澳中自由贸易协定，在澳中经贸关系中发挥着极为重要的积极作用。博览会官方合作伙伴是澳大利亚中国工商业委员会和澳大利亚中国总商会 （ACBC）， 是澳大利亚政府的商业顾问。CCCA 是澳洲中资企业的代表性联合组织，他们是澳中经贸合作领域中最权威的组织机构。博览会获澳大利亚联邦政府贸易委员会 和维多利亚州政府的官方支持，作为澳中两国间最具代表性和影响力的年度经贸交流盛会，为澳中企业增进了解互信，创造了合作商机。2019澳中博览会的主论坛和各主题论坛邀请了数以百计的各界大咖现场演讲和交流，获得数百家澳中企业和组织的积极参与，吸引了数万观众。澳中两国各大主流媒体争相报道。澳大利亚维多利亚州州长丹尼·安德鲁斯称赞澳中博览会是扩大澳中之间贸易和经济联系的极佳机会。中国驻墨尔本总领事龙舟先生也祝贺澳中博览会为中澳经贸投资交流搭建了一个极佳的平台。2020年的新冠疫情和复杂的国际关系给人类带来了极大的挑战，推动后疫情时期的经济复苏是澳中工商界的历史使命。澳中博览会将重点着眼于衣食住行学用玩等与百姓日常生活息息相关的行业，以20+21线上加线下的全新形式，在新环境中迎接新挑战。澳中博览会20将以网络论坛和线上展会的方式举行。这个大型高端商务论坛由主论坛和数个专业论坛组成，包括健康与养老、投资与地产、红酒与农产、大湾区经贸等多个专业领域。罗布阁下开幕致辞，探讨中澳经济发展的新常态、新思路、新机遇。澳中博览会线上展会强力推广，全年开放，永不闭幕。每个线上展位都是掘金之地，用来展示企业故事、产品资讯、图片和视频、联系方式等详细信息，随时入驻，随时展出，随时收获浏览和反馈。无论消费者和采购商都可以不受时间和地域限制，从电脑或手机终端进入线上展厅，或一类检索，或按名搜寻，可快速找到自己需要的商家和产品。澳中博览会21将于2021年7月23日开幕。澳中博览会21以展会、论坛、交流3大板块构建出强大的高端综合平台。为期3天的展会将吸引海量参观者，包括买家、投资人和大众消费者，是商家进行商业推广和品牌展示的最佳契机。全天论坛将邀请澳中两国政要、经济学家、行业大咖和商业领袖进行政策分析、信息分享，共同探讨商机和未来。博览会期间还将举办庆祝晚宴、颁奖典礼、专业讲座、双语人才招聘会、高尔夫友谊赛等活动。澳中博览会汇集两国官方及工商界信息和资源，成千上万的参与者通过这个多层次的互动平台，拓展人脉，寻找机遇，合作发展，互惠共赢，推动疫后经济复苏，造福两国人民。联通澳中，创造价值。澳中博览会20+21邀您共襄盛举，让我们2020相会在云端，2021相会在美丽的墨尔本。
在距离墨尔本市区2个半小时车程的地方，有一座世外桃源。卡梅尔山脉提供了天然屏障，隔绝了风暴与沙尘。几十年来，这里湖泊宁静，候鸟群飞，阳光充足，土地优渥。寒武纪时代遗留下来的古老土壤，形成了质地均匀的红色粘土地，让这里生产的葡萄颗粒饱满，甘甜可口。其中最出名的就是西拉子和赤霞珠。葡萄园旁边就是酿酒厂，酿造葡萄酒时，整个庄园果香四溢，沁人心脾。这里就是湖泊酒庄。经过庄主的悉心管理和酿酒师的精心酿造，这里生产了大批馥郁醇厚的葡萄酒佳酿。 这其中，布鲁塞尔葡萄酒及烈酒大奖赛向来被誉为酒中奥斯卡。湖泊酒庄引以为傲的品牌狂想曲，在2020年一举夺得该大奖赛的金奖。在湖泊酒庄的酿酒环节中，始终如一地坚持着小而精的精英路线，摒弃对葡萄酒的人工修饰和添加，最大限度保留葡萄中的天然和风味。这样酿造出来的葡萄酒，无论新酒还是陈酿，都能为饮者带来味蕾的盛宴。湖泊酒庄的夙愿即将落脚在这片枝繁叶茂、硕果累累、缱绻富裕的葡萄园，而这美好的愿景源自于一代又一代的传承与创新，就像葡萄酒的酿造一样，在日月更替中积淀、发酵，再焕发新生。而湖泊酒庄的葡萄酒事业也将在薪火相传中生生不息。
具有国际前沿技术和资源高度整合的澳大利亚贝恩医疗集团，集各种核心优势于一身，以具有国际领先的医疗养老、干细胞抗衰老、癌症医药研发、全球转诊、疫苗普惠、医院托管、医院国际化认证、科技项目孵化的前瞻优势为核心竞争力，以中国市场为海外拓展方向，力争在中国市场上建设一批国际一流水准的综合医疗产业。Ivowell Medical Group Pte Limited 澳大利亚贝恩医疗集团有限公司。
Welcome to ViPlus. The ViPlus was established in Tura, Victoria in 1893. Formerly known as the Tura Dairy Factory, it's one of the oldest and most trusted dairy producers in Australia. We've been supporting the nutrition of you and your family for more than 120 years. In 2013, ViPlus launched our very own milk formula brand, ViPlus Nutritional Milk. ViPlus starts at the source in South Gippsland, Victoria, one of Australia's most renowned golden pastures. We believe fresh, high-quality milk is the essential first ingredient for producing the best powdered milk formula products. We farm only purebred, grass-fed cows and encourage plenty of outdoor grazing to ensure they receive plenty of fresh air and exercise. We add only the highest quality supplements to suit the specific requirements of everybody at every stage of life. Each stage of the production process is guided by gentle care and a commitment to preserving the natural goodness of pure, fresh milk. We're constantly striving to improve our processes so you can be confident that we're providing the best possible nutritional support for you and your family. ViPlus Nutritional Milk. More than just milk.